Yeah, because if it was a white host, it would have been like, wow, this host is just so good at hyping up the crowd. It wouldn't have been attached to the color of him at all. It would have just been, wow, look at how skilled he is at doing this. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Minds of Media. My name is Blake Panashevitz, and today's guest is a host, interviewer, and content strategist who has done media work for at least the last 10 years and has worked with many outlets, including Cheddar Esports, AT&T, and is a co-host for a podcast called The Grassroots Podcast. Please let me introduce Erin Ashley Simon. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you. I know I have my sunglasses on. Guys, I'm not trying to be super cool. I have an eye infection, and I told Blake for literally like months on months that I was going to do this. So I was like, okay, let me find like a middle ground where I can still do it, but then not have like one eye drooping throughout the interview. So I had to
Yeah,
make
thank
sure
you so
that I
much
came on.
for doing that. Like coming on here with an eye infection, I was like, you know what? It's okay if you have to reschedule. Like I know stuff happens, life happens, and you were like, no, we're doing this. Like we're doing this, which I think just kind of shows to your dedication towards things. Like you're a very dedicated and hardworking person, like insanely dedicated and hardworking. Like as far as people who are involved in like esports and kind of coming up through, as well as being involved in like media and journalism in general. So I'm really excited to delve deep into who is Erin as a person, because that's what I like to do. So kind of starting it off like slightly maybe, I don't know, easier. One of the things that I think I've noticed kind of looking through like your collection of like work that you've done is that culture is a huge aspect that is important to you, and almost like the pillar that you've kind of attached to. What do you think it is about culture, or like the culture of gaming and media, that you so attached to and find riveting to work with?
I think that having that component is so important because the historical context of whether it is gaming or any other industry, right? That is going to always be tied to culture, and having that component be something that's at the forefront is super super crucial and important, especially when we're addressing certain conversations and certain issues. Whether it is the conversations around Fortnite and the dances that they have and how people felt a certain way. If I was a 12-year-old kid, I may not fully understand why some people feel upset about that. And it's
Hmm.
important to have that context, whether it's the historical aspect of it or the social and socioeconomic aspect of it. And I think that's just super important because unfortunately, whether it is in gaming, whether it is in traditional sports, whether it's in music, there are
Yeah.
certain social issues and things that affect business or affect money or affect even the scene. Like, for example, people are like, where are the women? Where are the minorities in esports? Well, but also people have to keep in mind that there are areas and individuals who can't afford PCs, and consoles are more affordable, at least for now. And so having that understanding, whether it's from a culture standpoint or even for, like, for example, right, even on like a lighter note, talking about the people like Lupe Fiasco being involved in the FGC. Everyone's seeing all these artists coming in, whether it's Offset or just
Hmm.
Juju Smith-Schuster, and people are like, oh, all these celebrities are just starting to come in, but that's not true. If you look from a cultural standpoint, hip hop has always been tied to video games and
Hmm.
gaming. Everything, even Notorious B.I.G. has a Psychogenesis line in his one of his songs. So I think that having that component is super important, especially when we're talking about esports or video games or just anything like that. And so that's something that I've been kind of has been something near and dear to me. And just kind of like organically, right? I'm always someone that wants to speak on these things, but then also I've had people in esports and even just the gaming industry who, because of who they work for, they cannot speak on some of these things. And
Yeah.
so for me, it's like they look at me to be someone who has these conversations or corrects people when it comes to certain things. So it's just naturally it's kind of come about in that way. But also when we speak of culture, right? There is this somewhat of a connotation or just somewhat of an understanding that, for example, Black culture is very, very intertwined with certain things in gaming or music and etc. And so by nature, because I am Black, there are certain things that I understand from that perspective as well. So that's why I've kind of just taken this lane there's already a lot of experts, there's already a lot of casters and commentators and people who just really know video games and certain games inside and out, like whatever that one game or two or three, like they really know.
Yeah.
And so I'm the kind of person where it's like I came to the industry and I was like, okay, where can I fill the hole that is needed in this industry? And I just felt like that was it. And that's something that I've always been doing and always been a part of. So it just honestly just felt natural to me to begin with.
Okay. So kind of looking at that, you've actually touched upon a couple things that I wanted to ask you about, because you actually mentioned like music, sports, and esports is kind of like the things. Have you always been so culturally invested in like the different cultures of like these really cool topics? Like it seems like you know everything that is like, if I had to like put a definition of cool, I feel like your name would very shortly afterwards be there, right? Because like you know all of like these really cool factoids and like involvement in all of these like really cool industries. Is it something you've always been kind of invested in, is like learning the behind the scenes, the cultural aspect of these things?
For me, I'm always constantly learning, right? I think it's super important, and not just from a journalistic standpoint, but I think it's super important that whatever industry that you may want to get involved with, it's more important to be a great listener than to be a great talker. And so, like for example, even when I came into the esports world, right, there were certain things that I didn't know. I didn't know certain aspects of for like the FGC and some of the initial problems and just certain things from different communities because I as someone who had to cover music and sports heavily, I was able to cover a bit of esports but not a whole lot. So during the whole first year of me kind of being in this scene, and I mean, I've always been a gamer. I've like, especially when we're going to talk about all these different video games and consoles, even way back, I've always been a gamer through and through. But like I said, there's certain things about esports that I was starting to learn. So I have a lot of friends that basically kind of taught me and would just explain things and broke it down. And so for me, I think especially when we're talking from a culture standpoint, right? It's so important to be a great listener because you can learn so much more about not just the overall community, but just even the sub communities within it. And so from there, I've I, it was so intriguing to me, just hearing from different perspectives and different people. They could be in the same community, they could be separate. I could hear from someone who is an LGBTQ plus person versus someone who's a white man versus someone who's a woman. Like it's just interesting to kind of see the different sides of everyone. And so for me, I'm always so interested in just people and communities and cultures. Even now, right? I'm someone who is, when we're looking at esports, right? And obviously because esports is so culturally diverse, right? Even now, I'm even actually learning just about certain things when it comes to culture within South Korea, and not just even at an esports level, like even from like the kind of content they look at, the
Mm-hmm.
kind of news they look at, certain things that are acceptable for them and not acceptable. And I think that having that better understanding allows me to have these conversations. And it also allows me to kind of like engage with people from those different communities and cultures. And so, so for me, it's like, I've always been someone like, I'm such a massive nerd. I love learning. I'm always looking at different pieces or videos or listening from different people or even watching different. I even watch like foreign shows just so I can feel like I'm taking the time and investing in understanding other people's communities and cultures because I want them to understand, especially if I'm talking about certain things that are tied to the Black or Latin community. I myself want them to listen and understand where I'm coming from. So if
Yeah.
people see that I'm actually taking the time to learn from them, then that's what makes these dialogues and conversations important. And it makes it so everyone's listening versus arguing and yelling at each other, which will that's never going to solve anything.
Yeah, exactly. So where did you grow up?
So I grew up in New Jersey,
Mm-hmm.
was born outside of Philadelphia. So my dad's from Philly and my mom's from New York. So I grew up pretty much around the tri-state area over here. And so I was always very much uh I've always had like different ethnicities, different, like I said, cultures, different people around me all the time.
Yeah.
So I would say like growing up in this area really set me and prepared me for just everything else.
Now, what did your parents do for a living growing up?
So my both of my parents, so my mom was a VP of Merrill Lynch. She was more on the tech side. So was my dad and also my stepdad too. My stepdad actually created one of the earliest PC video games, which was really
Wow.
cool. And yeah, so when it comes to technology and just video games, that's just something that like has always been instilled. And then yeah, so like my mom also understands like business and finance and stuff like that, and so that's something that they kind of taught me to understand. So yeah, that's kind of like the overall gist. Both
Interesting.
all my parents, yeah, so all my parents, they worked at Merrill Lynch, and that's how like my mom met my stepdad, and then my dad worked there for a bit, and then he left. And my dad does like he helps to develop apps now for different companies. I think he's doing like a fitness app where he's working with the like actual big fitness chains and
Wow.
stuff like that. Yeah, so tech is like an overarching theme in my family.
Is that where you got a lot of your drive then to kind of like push yourself and to succeed? Because it seems like your parents are very much someone who would like push through and was always looking to achieve something kind of great. Because you mentioned like everything there, and I'm like, damn, that is impressive.
Yeah, I mean, so I would say my drive actually like initially is something that I've always had. I've
Hmm.
always been a competitor. Like I played soccer at a high level for 15 years. Was given an opportunity to try out for a few pro teams internationally and here, and I just chose not to do that route. So when
Hmm.
it comes to just like not allowing to 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 really go forward and do things and not allowing obstacles and challenges to kind of hold me back, that's just something that's always been in me. I think that the thing with my parents is they allowed me to pursue whatever passion or interest, because I'm someone who like when I'm really into something and I'm gonna go do something, it's not like I do it for a second, like that's it.
Hmm.
Like I do it forever long and try my best to build it up. And if I have to adjust, I have to adjust. But that's like something that my parents have always been like super supportive of. I mean, like even before I got into esports, I worked for another company, and due to the higher ups making horrible decisions, they had to lay off a lot of people. So I got laid off in 2018, beginning of 2018, right before I had to have hip surgery. And so for 6 months, I literally could not work, I was depressed, all this stuff, right? And then after that, when I could start working, I was like, you know what? I want to work in an industry and do something that I really love and that I feel like I contribute the most and I feel like people would appreciate me the most. And it's going to be hard to get in, but I'm going to try. So I was like,
Hmm.
and that's when I started covering esports and just started writing about video games. Shout out to my friend Kyle Harvey. He was the managing editor for the site called the Shadow League, and at that time, he was like, "Oh, like you really know about video games, you really know about the culture stuff. Like, well, why don't we just have you start doing that? Have you start covering the NBA? Reached out about their new esports league, NBA 2K league. So he's like, yeah, let's start having you do that. He's like, I feel like this is a great lane for you, and I agreed
Hmm.
too. I wasn't getting paid a whole lot, and so, I told my parents, I said, listen, I'm only getting like $2,000 a month. I was like, Mom, Paul, I'm going to pursue this for 6 months. Just give me 6 months and I'm going to land something. I'm going to land a more consistent job. So they were like, all right. And it was something that like, my parents like never questioned when it came to me. Like
Hmm.
when I had my mind on something that I was going to do it, I was going to do it. And usually I would end up doing it. And that's what happened. And then literally in November, October of that month is when I connected with the producer, one of our producers at Cheddar Esports, Brandon. And I was like, hey, if you guys looking for on-camera people, let me know. A few weeks later, because I ran into him at Red Bull Conquest in DC. And shout out to Amanda Stevens. Amanda is actually the one that helped connect me and
I
really
really
kind of
like Amanda Stevens.
helped bring
Actually,
me in. Oh, yeah.
I just had an interview with her that released last week at the time of this recording. So
Oh,
yeah,
nice. Yeah, I love her.
I've known her since like 2016, I think maybe 2015, something like. I've known her for a long time. She's an amazing human being.
Wow.
Uh,
Yeah, she is. She was one of the first people that kind of like embraced me and wasn't afraid to like just teach me. I was someone like I'm always someone that like if I don't know something, I'm gonna tell you I don't know it. I'm not gonna sit here and act like I do. And
mhm.
man was some of those people who is like, okay, cool, and really just introduce me to different people. And then that's how I ended up at Chitter Esports. My parents have been super, super embracive since then.
Well, I mean, even more than that, you also signed with a talent agency too, like just recently in like the last month, which is pretty impressive, going from literally no connections at all, really, to being signed in what, a year and a half?
Yeah, but you know what? I've I've had conversations with people about this because a lot of people in the industry have been asking me about just the process of finding management or just finding an
Yeah.
agent, right? And even though like I tell people, even though this happened in a year, I've had about 10 years worth of
Yeah.
work and building relationships and stuff that kind of got me to this point, right? And even with some of the other people, I put out a tweet essentially telling people that like, everyone thinks that they need an agent or a manager right away, but do you really need it? Like, have you put in the as much work as possible on your own? Do you feel like you gave it your all and then you got to this point and you keep hitting a ceiling? I feel like sometimes people they jump to the conclusion that they needed a management or agent just because that they themselves don't maybe want to do all the work,
Yeah.
or they feel like it's just too much and they can't do it. But at the end of the day, like even if you do get an agent, you still have to do the work yourself. I don't think people understand that agents are just trying to add on to the value that you are constantly building on. And
Yeah.
so, and also it's their job to help elevate you as well. Agents can sign you either when you're established or they see the growth potential or an area that they either don't have a client like that or they're like, okay, we could fill in definitely like this person has it or whatever it is that they're signing
Mhm.
on for. And so that was kind of the conversation with all the agents I was talking to. Like it was crazy because at first when I was looking at agencies, I didn't think I didn't think CIA would want someone like me because I thought I was too early, right? And for them to be like, no, we want you, And another agency I was looking at was Abrams Artist Agency with Amber Howard over there. Shout out to her. She's super amazing. And there's like a few others. And then, other people would tell me to like reach out to UTA and stuff like that. And it's crazy because even for myself, or as confident as I am, I felt like I wasn't at a point in my career where I should be having conversations with these people.
Yeah.
But then to find out that they were just like, no, like we want to sign you or we
Mhm.
want to work with you. And I was just like, wow, this is really cool. It just made me feel like all the work that I put in for like the past several years really came to this point and prepared me. And even for like, even when I was talking to him, I was literally talking to him for like almost 5 months before I even signed. I had so many questions and I wanted to make sure that I was signing with the right agency and felt like I was signing the right agency. And I narrowed it down to CA and Abrams. But I honestly, at the end of the day, even if I signed with Abrams, I felt like no matter what my decision, it would have been the right decision.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, you're not someone who really lives with regrets, kind of from what I've seen from like other things. It seems like you're always like, once you make a decision, you live with that decision, you either live or learn from it. And I think that's a really good quality to kind of have. That okay, this is the decision I made. I'm gonna either live with it and learn from it, or it's gonna work out. So one of the things I wanted to ask you about, and this is something maybe that's a little bit personal to me too, is that my parents divorced when I was very young,
Okay.
and that had a lot of effects. I know a lot of people whose parents divorce. When did your parents divorce, and what was that like for you?
So when my parents divorced, I was super young.
Hmm.
I would say that initial divorce, I don't think affected me as much as my brother.
Hmm.
I have an older brother. His name is Ian. He does like fitness stuff. He's great.
Oh,
But he's 3 years older. So my parents divorced before I was like in third grade. I
okay.
think I was like second grade or something like that. And so my brother was about 2, 3 years older, even in age group. And excuse me, in school year. He's 3 years older about, but in school years he's two.
Okay.
And so for him, it definitely affected him. I would say that initial divorce moment, I was so young, it didn't really quite process for me. But my mom instantly put me and my brother in therapy
Oh
to
wow,
cope with whatever, yeah.
that's
My
really
family is
good.
very big. Yeah, my family's very big on therapy. My mom has gone to therapy, and it's been instrumental for her. So when my parents divorced, they made sure that we got a therapy. I've always been someone who, and even now, like I'm someone who's always gotten therapy as a kid, and as an adult. I feel like it's super important to
Yeah.
have that healthy kind of mental aspect. And but I would say that as I got older, it definitely affected me in different ways. It affected me on just certain relationships that I've had with guys. It affected me in terms of the confidence and self esteem that I had in myself, the image and perspective of myself, and especially because, like, I'm someone who is like I've never felt like, in terms of categorizing myself, like I'm not super femme, but I also am femme. Like it's like I love to get my nails done. Like I like to
Yeah.
do all these girly stuff, but it's like even just like in my appearance, right? I'm not super femme. And it's kind of like I'm in like this middle position. Some days I want to dress super up and girly, and some days I want to be a little more tomboyish. It's just, and so growing up with that, it was a little bit of a struggle because I put so much value, especially growing up, in what other people thought.
Yeah.
And that definitely, I think, stemmed from the divorce that my parents had. And so, and then especially when it comes to like, before, in terms of like how well, when I was younger, boys perceived me because I wasn't the super girly girl like some of my other friends and stuff like that. And so that was something that affected me for a good amount of my life. And definitely, the divorce of my parents, and just I didn't really have a relationship with my dad growing up too. And
Why
that was
not?
something that affected me. Just because my dad just had stuff he had to deal with himself. And some personal stuff he had to deal with himself in order for us to even have a relationship.
Yeah.
And so that was kind of why. But also, like, my stepdad has always been that father figure
Yeah.
for me. When my dad left, my stepdad really stepped up, and then also my grandpa also stepped up, which is cool because my grandfather is actually my step grandfather. He, because my mom's real father wasn't around. Same situation. And that's also why my mom made sure to have a very solid family and foundation, because she grew up with a single parent, my grandmother. And so that's why my mom made sure I had therapy and all this stuff.
Yeah.
And then she made sure that like my stepdad was like a really great guy. And he is a phenomenal guy. And I learned eventually through him just certain things that I lacked with my dad. And then also me just working on myself. I work in an industry, media is an industry that focuses and cares too much about your appearance, right? I've
Yeah.
had so many people that were just like, oh, you just don't fit the molds, and all this stuff, right? Like even like with me doing an interview now with you, I have my hair up, I'm wearing sunglasses, and I'm wearing a hoodie. And even that is like, oh my gosh, like she's not fitting the mold, she doesn't have makeup on. But it's just
Yeah.
like that's been something that I struggled with throughout my career. And then, it was my parents and my brother and my family and just certain friends. They were like, Erin, just be you. And I think that that's something that also like made me kind of like, and to bring it full circle, all those things that struggled for my divorce, or my parents' divorce, it helped me in terms of learning myself and finding myself, and then bringing out the best of myself. And I feel like right now, me being at 27, this is the most confident, the most sure of myself, the most comfortable I've ever been in my entire life. But it took a lot of work, whether it was the work from, rebuilding my relationship with my dad, which is
Hmm.
something that we've been working on. Building and rebuilding the self-esteem that I have and confidence that I have in myself. And then also just getting to a point where it's just like, I don't care what people think, because
Yeah.
at the end of the day, I receive so much love and support, and that should be the focus for me. Anyone that's trolling, or anyone that's like, there's even people that like judge me based off my hair because I have short hair. They assume that I have another orientation. They assume all this crazy stuff. And it's just like, it's like at the end of the day, I'm going to be judged no matter what. Even if I fit the mold, I'm still going to be judged. So I
Yeah.
might as well just be judged for being myself. So I've gotten to a point, I struggled growing up because of my parents' divorce, but then like now it's like, I think that all the stuff that I've gone through as a kid just made it prepare me even more for what I'm going through right now in the career that I'm going through.
Yeah, I think people would be kind of surprised to hear some of those statements, because I like, at least in the public eye, you always seem, at least from what I've seen you always seem very confident and almost self-sure of yourself. I think it's kind of surprising to hear that, oh, there was a time where maybe Erin's like main goal was to please others and was too worried about how others like felt. Is that the type of kid you were kind of like growing up through school, always trying to be like almost like a people pleaser, like trying to like vie for the attention of
Yeah.
others? Interesting.
So I wouldn't say too much that it was a people pleaser thing. It was just
Mhm.
more so that I was always afraid. Like, I never wanted to hurt anyone else's feelings. I never wanted to, basically, it came more from me not wanting to hurt other people because I
Mhm.
understood how it felt to be really hurt. And to have that hurt from someone that I felt like shouldn't have hurted me, but
Mhm.
did, you know? And so that's where it kind of came from. Like, like, even now, like, I'm a very compassionate and caring person. I'm always trying to help people as much as I can. But people would take advantage of my kindness.
Yeah.
And then it would end up hurting me. And that was something I had to really learn. And I'm someone that's like, if there doesn't have to be confrontation, I don't want confrontation.
Mhm.
And it was someone that, like, growing up, my mom's a very dominant woman. Like, she's just very dominant. That's just what the women in my family were very, like, we're very dominant in the sense of just like, we're not going to put up with anything, etc. But that also, I think my mom being like that as well was something that affected me as a kid, in the sense I
Mhm.
felt like I felt like I wasn't being heard. I felt like I couldn't speak my mind, or speak about my feelings or
Yeah.
emotions to her. And this is something that I spoke to my mom about already. And so that was something that like, that, like, both situations in terms of the divorce, and then also just my mom just being very, just like a very dominant Black Latin woman, and it was her way or no way, when I was growing up at certain times. And even now, sometimes my mom is just like very, like, over I wouldn't say, like, I'm trying to figure out the right word. My mom is, even now, like, she'll speak her mind and give you opinion even when you don't want it. And just over time, I've just learned, like, that's just her. But
Yeah.
I myself have my own opinions, and my own decisions as an adult. And so, but that's something that, like, affected me. So I was always just like, felt like I couldn't speak my mind, and I couldn't, like, talk about my feelings, or I was always worried about other people's feelings over mine. And so that's kind of like where that people pleasing aspect came from. But then once I, like, learned, like, you know, I can be kind and I can be considerate and compassionate, but I can also make sure that I'm okay as well.
Yeah.
And whoever in my life did not accept that, like, hey, like, I need to make sure I'm okay too. And if they weren't accepted of that, then they shouldn't be in my life, period. And so
Yeah.
that's what I started to learn. And I just started to get rid of certain people in my lives that I felt like just were trying to take more from me and not be there for me as a friend or just anything like that. And
Yeah.
then from that is when I found, like, amazing people. And then, that's when all the confidence, just all that stuff just started kind of happening. I think that happened it started when I was 22 is when it
Mhm.
started. 25, I think, was when I really was like, no, like, I need to know more. Like, I'm not
Yeah.
doing this anymore where it's just like I'm people pleasing or being super, super considerate of your feelings to the point where my feelings aren't being considered. And so I think that's when 25 was when I was just like, you know what? No, I'm going to start doing this. And so from 25 to 27 is when I really started doing certain things to get my confidence really at the level it is and to get to where I am now. And it's been quite a journey. I mean, it's been a lifelong kind of, like, journey of ups and downs, but 25 was when I was just like, no more, I'm not doing this anymore.
Yeah, I think that's kind of insane, like finding this later on in life, right? Like a lot of people think, oh God, everything is kind of ending, but like I can kind of relate to the same thing. Like I didn't really start to find myself till I was probably like, because I'm like 28 now, and so like when I was like probably in my 20s, early 20s to like mid 20s is when I really started to feel like very comfortable with myself. But like all before that
Mhm.
was kind of awful. So it's interesting, like almost like the relation that is there between that. So looking at your life and doing this. One of the cool things about you is you're heavily involved in sports. In fact, you even mentioned getting picked up or potentially being scouted and practicing or trying out for like pro teams, which is something that's really cool. Have you always been super interested in sports, and what made your interest in sports?
My family is a big sports family. My grandfather played basketball. My aunt and my dad were top track runners in the country. My aunt actually had a chance to run for the Olympics, but
Oh
she was
wow.
so young. My grandmother didn't allow her to. She was like 16. My grandma was like, no. Um, and so when it came to, and then also, like, I'm Puerto Rican, so also we watch soccer. We love soccer. So it's always like my family's always been a sports family. You know, all of us have played a sport. And so I love sports and I love the value that sports brings, you know, in terms of just, you know, it's one of the earliest challenges as kids that we have in terms of dealing with maybe a boss that you don't like, or
Yep.
other people competing against you, and how do you deal with it? How do you deal with pressure, immense pressure, all this stuff. And so, but I felt like, you know, especially being a young kid, when I was playing soccer, that's like when I was on the field, that's when like my confidence came out. I was a whole different person. I was like, I was a beast. I was just like, I used to tell my friends, hey, we're friends off the field, but when we get on the field, I don't know. Like, it was that competitiveness. And then
Hmm.
also, you know, some of my first role models were athletes, and just like looking at them competing, right? You know, rest in peace. Kobe Bryant was one of the athletes that like his mentality of like, I'm going to win and you're not going to affect me. Like that was something that I always looked up to. And then even
Hmm.
like Serena Williams, you know, going through not only on court adversity, but off court adversity, as is her and her sister being Black women in the space. And so for me, sports has always taught me so many valuable life lessons. And sports has always been something that I felt like there are intangibles in sports that like, or intangibles in like the competitiveness of sports that like other people won't understand unless
Yeah.
they're in it. You know, that's why I always kind of speak when we were talking about like esports pro players, right? There's certain things that like people are like, you know, when it comes to mental health, people are like, oh, they're too weak and I'm like, no, you don't understand. Like if you don't play in a high competitive level, like you're never going to understand the immense pressure
Yeah.
that's put on them and the immense pressure that's on them every single day. Like literally their well-being and livelihood is attached to a
Yeah.
contract. The same way as like for college soccer or college athletes or soccer players, you know, part of my livelihood was attached to my scholarship, which was attached to my performance, which was attached to the opinion of my head coach. So to constantly be under pressure and you're worried about losing a scholarship and stuff like that, it's a lot of pressure that you're living day in and day out. And so just soccer and just playing at a high level, being like, I was one of the top players in New Jersey and was considered one of the top players in the country in my age. And then, you know, if I didn't get to a certain school or a certain conference, you know, people would it's just, there's just so much with it. Or there were certain schools that were looking at me and there were certain people that were like, oh, you're lying. And I'm like, not lying. Like, I like, one of them was Stanford. Stanford actually was at one point recruiting me. And people thought I was lying about that. I was like, no, I just went to their camp. Literally have emails with the coaches and spoke to them. I have no idea what you're like, but
Yeah.
it's just the cattiness and all that stuff. It's just there's so much that can prepare you for the future, and so that's why I always love sports. I love sports, watching it. Just I get so hyped watching just different sports, even tennis. I get hyped watching tennis because it brings me joy, and also I feel like it's something that's like can sports are something that is so community oriented. Like you can make a new friend just going to a sports bar, watching a favorite football team or a basketball
Hmm.
team, or like your friends. You know, I have certain friends that I may not talk to them all the time, but when it's like the World Cup or it's like the Super Bowl or like we're texting each other nonstop, and so so my family's always been a sports family, but sports has been just so like important in my life in so many different ways.
Yeah, so I want to take a quick sidestep because you actually mentioned something,
Yeah,
and this kind of goes back to that culture, the cultural aspect. And one of the things I've always kind of complained about sports and like comparing sports to esports actually is the cultural aspect. Because if you look at the way that
yeah,
someone gets to pro sports compared to the way that someone gets to like esports, it's very individualistic for esports, at least right now, that is starting to change, but it's very slowly changing. It's all about yourself until you get to a certain level, and then you kind of get thrown into a group of people that you have to now suddenly magically work well with, whereas sports is almost the exact opposite. We're very early on. You're taught, okay, all of these different fundamental values you have to work up with, and as you progress in skill, you just functionally move to like the next level. Is that something that you kind of see as an issue with esports? And do you think that I think it's changing, but it's changing very slowly. But do you think there's a way to kind of jumpstart that and make that get changed faster, maybe?
Um, well, the one thing I would say is like even in sports, right? I think what esports has to do, especially when it comes to, well, there's multiple issues, right? So I'll backtrack. Then the one thing in traditional sports that also causes a problem with what you're talking about is the checking of egos, right? When
Yeah.
certain programs, right? For basketball, it's AAU. Soccer, in the US, they do not have it as a set development structure right now. It's just kind of like, who's the top player? Let's just focus in on them, and that's it, right?
Hmm.
And that's a problem that I see in traditional sports, and also in the fact that like it's so expensive to play even soccer, which is crazy because kids in other countries that are impoverished and etc. play soccer. So why is it that expensive? And so it leads to the whole discussion of, are we really getting the best players in the world or the country, right? That's another issue that I see with esports. Esports, a lot of the competitiveness is factored around the fact that they're PC gamers.
Yeah.
There are certain people that aren't PC gamers, right? And look, some of the top, and this is why I love soccer, some of the top soccer players in the world came from nothing,
Yeah.
literally were poor, or came from, certain areas that aren't very well off. But the academies brought them in and trained them and saw the potential in them, and made them be even bigger and better, right?
Hmm.
Esports doesn't do that right now. Esports, that's the problem I see from a cultural socioeconomic standpoint, is they're so focused in on the PCs. That's also why you do not see diversity in players in terms of their backgrounds, their ethnicities, is because of that, right? A lot of people are like, well, where are all the black players and da da da? Well, if you look at it, there are people that, there are black pro players. There
Yeah.
are. But if you see, a lot of them are tied to console based
Yeah.
competitive scenes, whether it's Gears, whether it is FGC, and
Yep.
etc. And yeah, there are some probably PC, but some of these kids, especially like for the New York City area, the New York City public schools, especially when it comes to internet, it's not great. Even area in general is not great in terms of internet connectivity. It costs money. And on top of that, too, to get a PC, at least for now, consoles are cheaper than
Yeah.
getting the appropriate PCs and getting the appropriate equipment in order to stream, in order to play at the highest competitive level. So even right now, there is a kind of gap that I see as a problem in esports. Now, I'm not saying that the pro players who are the pro players aren't the best. They are the best. But I also feel like we're not tapping into certain areas where we can truly find some of the best people. It's
Yeah.
just that they don't have the appropriate resources or the equipment in order to do so. And that's something that is a problem in traditional sports, and that's something that I think is a problem in esports as a whole as well.
Hmm.
And I feel like that's going to change just because I see that there are, and this is where I feel like the non-endemic brands come in, which is great. The non-endemic brands who are coming in have the money, and some of the brands want to help in that way. I've the work that I've done with AT&T, they've been listening. I've been telling them, I'm like, listen, if you're going to work with me, you need to give back. You need to help. And so right now we're working on some things in order to do that for this year. And so that's where the non-endemic brands and non-endemic people can come in. I also think that the formatting of traditional sport, whether it's player unions, whether it is the formatting of seasons, I think that's something esports needs to take.
Hmm.
Esports, I feel like, has built itself up, but there's certain things from a formatting and structural standpoint that does not it's not going to allow certain leagues and certain competitive scenes to be financially sustainable,
Yeah.
and just even from a viewership and content standpoint sustainable. There has to be, obviously you want to appease your hardcore fan, but if you want for more people to come in, you have to develop avenues for people who may be, like, for example, play Call of Duty
Yeah.
but don't understand the competitive side of it, or people who are just starting to play Call of Duty but want to understand the pro scene. There has to be an entry point for people to come in so that they can understand it a lot more. So I think that, and that's why, like, for example, the NBA, they have different broadcasts for the NBA.
Yeah.
They have the traditional broadcast, and they have like, and even for the NFL, they have the broadcast where it's like people like break down play by plays and stuff like that and really get super deep into it. Esports is going to need that, but that's
Yeah.
also the responsibility of the publishers and those who are behind it to spend the money on that. They're going to have to eventually. So there's a kind of the things that I see that's kind of problematic in both industries, but then also some things I see in traditional sports that I feel like esports should be taking in on.
Okay. I like that a lot. I also saw your interview with Gary Vee on the AB,
Yeah.
I actually think it's an ingenious idea, and I don't know why it hasn't happened yet. Because I don't follow sports. I'm like, wow, how has no one ever thought of this? This is literally like the most basic concept idea on the planet. Like, it seems so simple, and yet no one does it. And there are like hardcore people who literally just gate their esports from other people being in. Like, oh, you don't know this. You're just you're fucking stupid. And you're like, no, that's not how this works. If you want your game to last long, you have to be more accepting and help people. Like, that's just kind of how it's gonna
Yeah.
work. Or your game's going to die eventually. So it's interesting and it's
Yeah, you
wild.
have to be that way. And there was someone, and this is something I learned. I learned that like for Dota competition that they used to do that, and I was just like, oh wow, like so it's so cool that it's been done, but
Yeah.
it's also mind blowing that it's like why isn't it continuing to
Yeah.
be done? But hopefully we'll see. Maybe it'll change.
Yeah. So sports being a huge part of your life, I assume that had something to do with like your college decision too. Then was sports like the main thing you were thinking about when you were leaving high school and going into college, or were you looking at degrees? Very interesting. You actually went for a psychology degree, which I have a psychology degree. So starting off before you ended up going into I have it written down journalism and new media and business management. So which is hard to say.
Yeah, yeah. So when I first started off, I wanted to do this is an interesting pairing. I wanted to do psychology paired with kinesiology.
Ooh.
Because because I also wanted to I understood some of the how therapy really helped me as an athlete. And I wanted to not only to be able to help athletes in terms of performance, but also mentally as well.
Yeah.
So that's where I was going to. But then just I was writing and covering sports for my blog and stuff, and I was just like I was passionate about both, but I was like, oh, I'm really, really super passionate about this, and so that's when I made my transition, and I realized Rutgers didn't have a journalism major; it was like communications,
Yeah.
and I was like, no, I want specifically journalism, like that's what I want, and so that was part of the reason why I transferred. There's other reasons at the time I just didn't like the soccer program there. I just didn't like how things were being handled at the Rutgers soccer program.
Okay.
So that was like, I was like, should I transfer? Should I not? And then there was this one moment that kind of happened, and I was just like, yeah, it's time for me to transfer. And so, but I'm so everything happens for a reason, the
Can
friendships and people that I've built relationship. Oh yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, go
can I
ahead.
ask if that because I had read somewhere that you had gotten hurt playing soccer. Was that the moment where you were like, okay, maybe we want to do something else?
So when I got hurt playing soccer, I got hurt at Kentucky. That was the moment that I actually ended up quitting my senior year. So when I got hurt, I had an injury and no one could figure it out. And I had that injury up until 2018 when I had that hip surgery.
Wow.
That surgery was for an injury that I got my sophomore year playing soccer. And so that was another thing too, was when I was at Kentucky. Um, it was very problematic in the sense of at that time, people thought that I was making my injury up. I literally couldn't use my left leg. And I found out one of the symptoms of my injury was that my leg would lock up. And I would say, like, hey, I can't use my left leg. I don't know why I can't use my left leg. Because I went from literally being able to dribble and do everything with both legs to not even really be able to do it well with my left leg. And I'm like, this is weird. Like, I know how to dribble with my left leg. Why is this happening?
Hmm.
And so that also kind of caused like a lot of clash with me and my coach and just other people. And so I got to the point where I was just like, you know what? I need to focus on my health. So I'm going and also I was like also at one point I felt like I was getting punished for taking an internship during preseason. And
Hmm.
so just that together, I was just like I finally made a decision to quit and enjoy my senior year just being just a regular student. And I was
That
like,
must
oh
have
my
been
gosh, this
so
is amazing.
relaxing.
It was, and it was so amazing. And like also at that time, because I got most of my classes done, I barely had any classes in my senior year because I took summer classes. So I had a few the first semester, and then the second semester I interned. I interned in a local newspaper with one of my professors, Delano. shout out to him. Like he's been instrumental in like helping me become better in writing and better as a journalist. And so my senior year was like I was able to just basically be a kid, because like when you're playing a sport at a high level, like yeah, you're a kid, but like you can't like, it's like also hard to be a kid and to make mistakes and to do things like to party and stuff. Like you can't do that stuff really as much. And
Yeah.
so I was able to just really enjoy my youth and just be young and just have fun. And then I had fun also my 2 years when I moved to New York, and I had a lot of fun. That's all I would say. So, but you know, I needed that, and I needed to really enjoy life. And I think senior year also prepared me, because like when you play a sport for all your life, that's your identity.
Yeah.
I think for me, it was so much easier because I was already working on other aspects of myself, and other passions. So yeah, I missed it. Like I still miss playing. I love soccer. It was sad. It was part of my life, but it was an easy transition for me identity wise, because I was already working on the journalism stuff, and I was like, oh, I already have my other identity. So
Yeah.
it
So
was great.
I
Yeah.
was gonna ask you. You were being scouted by pro teams. At what point were you being scouted? Was that like towards your end of college? Was it earlier in college? Like when were you being scouted?
Uh, my junior year, like towards the end of my junior year.
Hmm.
And then like I started getting emails for it. And then senior year, I got an email saying like, hey, do you want to, we're having tryouts. Do you want to join? You're someone that we're considering. But it was just like one of those things where I was like, I don't want to go through all this again. I think like towards the end of my senior year too, I started losing passion for soccer just because I went through so much stuff.
Hmm.
Like I just didn't want to do it anymore. And so I was like, I'm more passionate about the journalism stuff. Granted, I still love watching soccer. That it wasn't that,
Yeah.
I love watching Barcelona, FC Barcelona. That's like my team. I love watching soccer. But just me playing it, I just lost that drive.
Hmm.
And funny enough, that's like some of my other friends who played soccer, they lost the drive as well, or it's because of their own personal experiences. So I think that was the point where like I started to receive that those emails and stuff like that. But I was already kind of out of it. I was just kind of like, eh. And
That's
then
fair.
also I was gonna make, like I started making like $50,000 right out of college. So I was just like, yeah, that's a lot better.
Yeah, a lot safer probably.
Yeah.
So one of the things I was going to ask you is, one of the people don't realize this about esports. So there's a lot of politics, and I feel like this is probably true with any like high competitive job that is also like a lot of contracts, just contracted work in general. There tends to be a lot of politics in the background,
Yeah.
or doing stuff like that. Was that one of the things that kind of killed your passion for the sport? Was it all of the stuff in the background that kind of goes on and happens?
Uh, I think for me, it was some of the politics. I also think it was just the treatment. I think also mentally, I was getting so worn down. Like I would have breakdown moments, uh, mentally, emotionally, and to the point where it wasn't healthy.
Yeah.
And I did see psychologists when I went to the university. Because also like, granted, I was confident, but I was also some of the stuff that I was dealing with in terms of just
Yeah.
the personal stuff that stemmed from my parents' divorce and stuff like that. I was still dealing with, and so all of that together, it was just like I was just like I'm not happy. And for me, if I'm not happy, and when I say not happy, like granted, there's gonna be moments in life where you're not gonna be happy, and that's fine. But I was consistently unhappy, and for a while now, and I was just like, and that was the decision where it's like my happiness is more important. And if this thing is not making me happy anymore because of the politics or whatever, then I'm not gonna do it anymore. Granted, there's politics in everything. Like even the journalism work I'm doing now, there's politics,
Yeah.
right? And I've had to deal with a lot of the politics by myself. And, excuse my French, but a lot of the BS I dealt with in my industry. Uh, and even now with an agent, I'm still dealing with BS. But that's something that's always going to happen. But at least like as long as I'm happy, I'm fine with maneuvering through these things. And then also I started to kind of learn how to look at the bright side of things, right? If
Yeah.
things aren't exactly what I want, I can control my response, and I can control the situation whatever way I can so that it makes it better for me, right?
Yeah.
And I think that that's like the most important thing. And then in addition to that, I think for me was when I quit soccer in college, I realized, you know what? No one has power over me except myself.
Mhm.
Like, I was so afraid of losing my scholarship or quitting, and I didn't quit earlier because I didn't want my parents to help me with my tuition. You know, I growing up, my mom was like, "You're gonna go to college. Here's your options. You get an academic scholarship, athletic scholarship, or you're gonna get a job and pay for it." She's like, "Those are your only options." So for me, I was like, "Oh well, athletic." And I also got academic too. I was a really good student. I graduated with honors in high school and college. And so, um, but I was like, dang, like I gotta figure out how I'm gonna pay. Like I can't get a job right away, like all this stuff. And so, but luckily my parents, they saw how unhappy I was and they were just like, listen, this is your last year. We worked on applying for scholarships. I got a lot of different scholarships at UK. And then on top of that, whatever was left over, my parents are like, just take out a loan. It's not like they're like, just take out a loan because it's not gonna be a whole lot. It's your last year, it's your
Yeah.
last semester. You can pay it off easily. Like, don't worry about it. So then just having that reassurance made me like say, like, okay, I'm gonna leave because I'm unhappy. And then after that, I was so relieved and so happy. And it was the right decision.
So you kind of almost mentioned, it sounds like almost like pride, like not wanting to go home and asking your parents for help. Are you someone who's always been kind of like prideful and not easily able to ask for help? Is that something you struggle with? That's something I struggle with. I suck at asking for help.
It was something that I struggled with, but it was more so because like, so my mom has been like fairly sick all my life. Like she deals with several different illnesses. And so for me and my brother, you know, growing up, one, we grew up faster than most kids. There's certain
Yeah.
things I had to do when I was 8 years old that like 8 year olds shouldn't even be doing, right? And so with that in mind, I always was like, I do not want to put any potential like less stress that I could give my mom, I wanted
Yeah.
to. I didn't want her stressing about my school. I didn't want her
Yeah.
stressing about my grades. Like, so I was always someone who just like stressed about those things because I didn't want that from her. And so, but that also kind of contributed to me like not wanting to ask for. I was always like, I'm gonna figure out myself. I'm gonna figure it out. I'm gonna figure it out.
Yeah.
I'm gonna figure it out. And even to this day, I'm someone who's like, I'm gonna figure it out, right? And but then like over time, I just realized like it's okay to ask for help when you need help. You know, I think the moment that made me change that mentality was when I had surgery and I was laid off and I was just had struggling finding certain jobs and I eventually asked for friends to help me and stuff like that. And then I realized it's not that bad. It doesn't mean that you're weak. It doesn't mean
Yeah.
that you're not putting in the work. It's just sometimes you need that additional help. And so I was always someone who didn't want to ask for help, but it was more so just because I didn't want to. And it also goes back to the people pleasing thing. I don't want to put pressure and stress on other people and put my problems on other people because if it's my problem, I need to figure it out myself. But then eventually I just learned that it's okay to ask. Like part of the reason why I got like signed to an agency is because I asked my friends, hey, do you know people at the different agencies I could talk to? And they're like, yeah, of course, we'll connect you. Do you have a reel? I'm like, yeah, here's a reel. And so I put in the work to get the reel and everything together and they just connected. And so yeah, I would say like now I don't have a problem. And I also like didn't want to ask people for help because I didn't want people to look at me as if I was weak in the sense of like the mental health component of it, you
Yeah.
know, because I deal with anxiety and I deal with anxiety and I also sometimes dealt with seasonal depression. And so I don't everyone's always like, oh, Erin's strong, she's confident, all this stuff. And I just didn't want people to think that I wasn't. And then also on top of that too, I didn't want I didn't want to put those feelings and stuff on other people. And also, you know, mental health as a conversation is still a stigma, but it wasn't really
Yeah.
talked about as much growing up. And so for that, I was afraid to have those conversations with people and for them to think that like, oh, she may be unstable and like all these
Yeah.
misconceptions that come with mental health stuff. And um, so that was also another reason why. But then now it's just like I talk about it. I let people know I have anxiety. I let people know all these things because I think it's so important, especially as someone in my position where people look up to me. It's
Yeah.
so important to let them know that, like, hey, like I struggle just as much as anyone else. I go through problems just like anyone else. I've even asked for help just like you do. You know, don't feel like because you see certain things on social media that everything's sweet and dandy and all this stuff. It's like, no, it's still challenging for me, the things that I go through as well. And just, but I feel like certain responsibility now more than ever to kind of let people know that, and to also not be afraid to ask for help because of just the fact that people look up to me.
Yeah, I think there's also a difference between asking for help and trying to look for a shortcut. I feel like a lot of people are just trying to look
Yeah.
for kind of like shortcuts. I mean, especially like one of the questions I always get asked is like, how do you get into esports? And it's like, well, I mean, if you're asking the question, that's probably a bad sign to begin with, right? Sure, it might just be this, but like everyone's esports journey is very, very, I would say, different in what they did. But one of the common things is they figured it out. It wasn't like they were just like, I'm gonna ask for help, right? Like I had like a 2-year plan of getting into esports through like going to psychology and possibly becoming a therapist and doing all of that stuff. It wasn't like I was like, oh, how do I do this? It was like, okay, well, I'm gonna try to figure something out and see if this works. But I noticed that with a lot of people in esports, whether they're casters, whether they're in journalism, they all have pretty much figured out a way, and then they ask for help, but they have a plan going into it. It's not like they're blindly throwing themselves at it. And I think that's kind of like the biggest problem is that the only advice that's actually useful is have a plan. Like figure out some sort of plan and try it. Like
Yeah. Just do it.
yeah, just do it. I feel Shia LaBeouf it up.
Yeah, I mean that's something too, because it's funny you say that, because a lot of people ask me, oh, I want to hear about your story, your background, all this stuff. But I say this with a very genuine approach to it, right? And a very kind-hearted approach to it. I always tell people, don't ask me that question. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how I did it, because that's not necessarily how you're gonna do, right? Yeah. I think that there's better ways to kind of figure out, like, okay, what were the skill sets that you developed outside that are useful for esports, right? Yeah. There's just certain questions I feel like would be important. I feel like for, especially when people ask me like, how did you get in? And I want to hear about your backstory. It's just kind of like, I don't know. I just, for me, it's like, don't worry about how I got in. Don't worry about my past, right? I feel like it's more valuable for me to kind of explain certain things I did in terms of like how did I approach people to get mentored? How did I, go about pitching myself to even get an opportunity with Cheddar Esports, right? It's just certain things I think ultimately would be more valuable. Because like you said, everyone, like you literally every friend that I have sports, their journey was all different.
Yep.
So
every single one.
It's like every single one. So it's like you can get a way in. It's just like so my thing I always tell people is, what do you want to do? Oh, I want to do what you're doing. I want to broadcast. Are you filming yourself? Are you filming yourself talking about esports? Do you have a podcast that you can film via Discord or whatever? Are you doing any of that? No? That's probably the first place you should start. Are you engaging with the community? Are you going to local events? Are you asking people or trying to find Discords with other esports people in your community? If you're not doing these things, then you're not going to get into esports right away. Like you have to, it's a journey and it's a process. And I think that like, if anything, I think like letting people know less about, my journey and more so about just how, like certain things I did in order to get to the point that I'm at, I think is way more valuable and important. And I just say that because like, I don't want people to think that like I'm mean or like I'm an asshole or whatever. I just want to make sure that whoever asks me any questions will get the most valuable tools and assets, because it's something I learned from my mentors, right? The relationship building process is how you learn more about me. But everyone's time is valuable. Yeah. Take the time, or whatever time it is, if it's 5 minutes, figure out what's the most important thing that you need to know to help you get to where you want to go, and ask those questions. If you want to learn about someone and learn about their journey, more than likely, if they're at a certain position, they got interviewed already. So you can go and read all about that. You don't have to ask them that question. Spend that time asking them the questions that are going to help you with getting to where you want to go. Do not waste any of those times asking questions that you could probably find yourself if you Google. That's super important. You should be Googling people anyway before you talk to them. Oh, but God, you should be wasting that time where you can look it up.
Like depending on how like big a guest is or how long they've been involved in any sort of scene, like the amount of research I actually do with these things is like at least 10 times normally the length of the video, if not 20 or 30 times, which is maybe a poor efficiency of time, but my goal is to ask questions that haven't been asked. The only way to do that is to go through all of the questions that have been kind of asked. So I want to jump a little bit here. You're really heavy into both music and sports and esports. One of the interesting things is at least music and sports have had huge issues with contracts and different things revolved around contracts. And especially considering you know so much about the history, I imagine, of all of those things. What do you think about when you, because you're involved in the behind the scenes of esports, what do you think about when you hear some of these stories? Because there are some horror stories that happen, some of which get published, a lot of which don't.
So when I hear these stories, I try to utilize Cheddar Esports as a way to talk about them without obviously revealing who I get the information from. Because, I'm someone who isn't tied to, like I said, a publisher or a big company. So I can speak on these things. And it's funny because I have relationships with a lot of these people in these different areas, and they're completely fine with me talking about it because it's the way that I go about talking about it, right? And I just, I keep telling people and kids, make sure you get a lawyer. I don't care. Like, there are lawyers and there are lawyers that can look over contracts, right? They may not be esports lawyers, but they know how to read contracts.
Yeah.
You should never sign a contract without a lawyer looking over. Never. Even with the agencies that were trying to sign me, I made sure I had a lawyer review every contract, gave me the questions to ask, and I asked them myself. Also, never be afraid to ask hard questions and never be afraid to negotiate percentages and all that stuff. And also, do not let a company rush you to signing. That's kind of like a trick that businesses use. They'll rush you and be like, if you don't sign with me, you're going to lose an opportunity. And they try to plan. No, if they're talking to you still, they want you. They're just trying to have you sign for less. Never allow them to push you. And if there's a manager or an agent that otherwise tries to force you and push you to sign something too soon, that's a red flag. You shouldn't be signing with them. They should be like, whenever you're ready to sign, we're ready to sign. They'll tell you, be like, hey, the sooner the better, because we can start working on you. Like, for me, when I was talking to the agents, the conversations was like, take your time, but just know that we want to be prepared to start pitching you by January. But so just keep that in mind. We're not forcing you. We're not pushing you. We're giving you as much time. But that's just something that if you want to target a specific time, we want to have you sign before January. So then once January hits, we can start pitching you to all these big companies. So in terms of like the work doing outside of Cheddar, whether it's like brands and stuff like that, right? And so these are like certain things that we see in traditional sports that we also see in esports. But the problem is esports, there's so many young kids in so many different areas, not just pro players, but even, Nadeshot at one point was young, right? There's so many different young people who are kind of leading the initiatives and efforts, but even with them, they don't quite understand certain stuff. Not like in traditional sports where it's been so many years and decades, you have older professionals that can assist and help with it. And I think now, though, like, we're starting to get certain professionals coming into the space. Like, there's more lawyers, there's more financial people that want to come into the space. Now, with that, though, there's problems, because then there's people that just want to come in because of the dollar signs, right?
Yeah.
But there are certain people who just genuinely want to come in and help people. And so that's where, like, it's so interesting just to see just the correlation. And even, like, for example, I actually tie the certain problems I see in esports, I actually tie it even more to like hip hop and the music industry.
Well, that's why I brought it up, is because it seems like there seems to be a lot of correlations, just because I'm really kind of big into like old music and stuff like that. And you hear some of the deals that happen, and you're like, oh my God, it's just literally just the same thing over again. Like, it's insane.
It literally is. And it's crazy too, because it's like, it's crazy because it's like there are people that are really taking advantage of kids. They're really taking advantage of the youth. They're really taking advantage of kids. And that should not be the case. I think that ultimately, for me, when it comes to business, transparency is the best policy, right? I think that as long as there's transparency, on both sides, not just on one side, on both sides. That's where appropriate relationships and business can be made. But I think that kids like get so enthralled by like all the lights, the advantages, the benefits, but it's
Yeah.
like they really got to take the time to feel like to see like, is signing with this agency going to be valuable? Is this really going to contribute to my brand? Are they really going to help me? Are they really going to do what they say they're going to do? I've told anytime I do business with anyone, I never sign. I always put them to the test. I'm like, all right, if you say you're going to do this, I need to see it for myself.
Hmm.
Or who are the people that you're going to talk to? What are you going to do? What's your plan? If you don't have a plan, if you don't like, then what's the point with me signing with you? I
Yeah.
think that a lot of times it's like people listen to all the positives, all the, oh, we could do this, but how? They never ask how. How are you going to do it? Right? So it's I don't know. It's so interesting to see the correlation of just certain industries that are still struggling with the same things that esports is struggling with. Music industry is so bad in the sense that it's still struggling with those contracts and percentages the same way that esports people are. But it's also interesting why like it's interesting to see how like a lot of artists from music are like now getting into esports too. And I'm like, oh gosh.
Yeah, right. It's crazy. So kind of almost looking at that. What do you think is the way that we fix that? Because I'm highly like, no offense to you or anyone else, but like journalism, while stories come out, it seems like there's been some change with some things, but in other times you hear about the same stuff happening like over and over again, and
Yeah.
it's almost like nothing until in my opinion, until lawsuits start to be brought up significantly, until people start actually having lawsuits. I don't think things are going to change. That's my opinion, but I'm very pessimistic.
Well, it's starting to happen. I mean, even like what the Riot Games lawsuit that's happening right now, I think
Yeah.
is super. It's setting precedent for everyone else in terms of just the treatment of women in this space. So I think that I agree. There's going to be more lawsuits, and it's going to happen. And because lawsuits are the quickest way to have issues be public.
Yep.
Um, but also I think that I'm very optimistic because there are people coming to this space who genuinely want to help people and aren't trying to screw anyone over. And I think that having that and highlighting that is super important. I also think that having these appropriate business structures set up is going to help too, because like I said, there are people running companies that don't quite understand business, right? They
Yeah.
may be great on putting together community events, but you're running a business and you don't understand business, right? And so but I also think that the best way for this esports industry to kind of to get fixed and to build is to allow for other perspectives that may not be esports perspectives to come in. That's the one thing I have to say about the esports world. And granted, there are amazing people, but I also feel like some individuals are so gatekeeping and so like, oh, we're right, you're wrong. We've been in this for so. It's like, no, it's not about what's right and wrong. It's about how can we fix this. And clearly, it's not hasn't been fixed since you've been in it. So what other perspective, what other person can we help have come in and just give perspective, and then we can figure out how to fix it all together. I think that's a problem with esports. Like, and I get it, right? It's also why esports has stayed the way that it is, and it has been great. It's because they don't allow other people to come in and to ruin it.
Yeah.
But there's also you need to have other people come in to kind of help with fixing certain problems that you just don't have the solution to, or you just don't know. And I think that we have to stop having this know-it-all perspective, and really just start learning from other people and under other industries and just other angles. And I
Yeah.
feel like that's can also help contribute to some of the problems that we see in esports.
So kind of looking at that, one of the things I wanted to ask you, and this is something that kind of worries me, is a lot of people say that esports right now is currently a bubble with a lot of the money that is kind of being invested in. Specifically, people bring up things like Overwatch League or CWL as examples of things that look very terrifying, especially with the way some of the for example, CWL not announcing who their broadcast person was until like
Yeah.
what was it, the day before it was. I recorded the day before, they still hadn't announced it yet, so that's like a terrifying thing. And you see like the amount of money that's in there, and you're like, this is a very basic thing that shouldn't be happening. And if basic things aren't happening, what else isn't happening? I think it's probably the conclusion that people draw. So kind of looking at that, do you worry that esports maybe is a bubble and that it could like blow?
Um, I would say people have. I wouldn't worry just yet, just
Hmm.
because we're starting to see various companies come into this space, and not just come into space to like provide money, but also come into this space to fix it, or to help and assist. I think with what's going on, right? I think it can be changed, but there has to be a massive effort. Like people don't even know or don't even remember that the NBA used to be a failing company. The
Yeah.
NBA used to be failing. David Stern came in and implemented certain things and changed narratives, like focusing on players instead of teams and stuff like that, and built it up to be a global sport.
Yeah.
The same could be provided for esports in the sense that like I wouldn't say like making it global, but fixing some of the problems. I don't think it's too late yet. I
Okay.
think it's important for us to look at it and be like, yeah, it's not great right now. We have to fix it. But also, a lot of the companies that are getting into this space, they understand that they're not going to get an immense return on investment now. They understand that, but it's more so about, okay, what are you going to fix about it? Now that they're implementing these city-based franchises for like Overwatch League and Call of Duty, there's certain things that they're going to have to focus on, like regionalization, marketing, and
Yep.
specifically when it comes to that, creating these narratives, having the hero players and the evil players that everyone loves to hate but loves to watch. Also, like for Overwatch League, right? Another thing I've noticed is like you have players, you have international players. How are you going to market those international players to U.S. citizens, where so
Yes.
that there is that cultural connection, right? That's another problem I see with the Overwatch League in terms of the marketing for these regions. So it's just like figuring all of that out, because like for example, look, the NBA, we have international players and they're able to market those international players, but also some of our top players are US based players. And also we have a lot of US players in the NBA and the NFL and stuff like that. So it's just about figuring out these little things in order to market it and to make it more exciting. Even events, right? How do you develop these events so you keep your audience engaged throughout the entire time? I felt like the home set for Call of Duty League, even though I understand why they did it, I felt like it was way too long. So people weren't getting engaged. They were tired. They weren't like, oh my gosh, all the time, right? But I also understand it's a new league. They got to figure
Yeah.
it out. Like this is going to happen, and I think that sometimes, yes, there's problems that need to be fixed in esports, and we see these problems. But I don't think that we should be like jumping to the conclusion like, oh my god, it's going to burst. It's done for. Problems can be fixed. It's just how soon are we going to actually try and fix these things? And
Yeah.
sometimes we can fix certain things and sometimes we can't. But I think that just right now, since there's so many people that are trying to come into this space, that's kind of keeping everything afloat right now. But as people are coming in, you're going to have to start, you know, fixing some of these dents
Yeah.
that we're seeing.
I feel like there's going to be probably a correction. So I actually have two questions left for you, and then we'll all be
Yeah,
good.
no
There's two
problem.
two left. So I feel so bad. I'm like, oh god, I feel so bad that I kept you here. You should be sleeping and relaxing. And I'm like,
It's okay.
um. So looking at esports, what is a major issue that you would like to see fixed tomorrow, and what do you think are a plan to go about fixing that issue? What do you think that people should start doing in order to fix that?
Um, Esports has uh from okay, so esports has, I would say, a diversity issue. And it's funny because even though it's quite diverse, it's not
Yeah.
diverse at the same time. And it all starts with inclusion, and inclusion, whether it's in the publishing company, whether it's inclusion in broadcast team, because like for example, you look at certain broadcast teams. So Overwatch League, Malik Forte is the only black broadcaster, or was one
I
of
don't
the
think
only black
he's
broadcasters in
not
that.
doing Overwatch next or this
No,
year
he's
either.
not. He's not doing. No, he's not doing it either.
Yeah.
But when he was doing it,
Yep.
he was one of the only. And it's funny because he has a tweet that he saved where, hold on, I gotta pull this up because I messaged him and I was just like, I laughed, but then I also was just like, wow, this is also kind of sad in the same sense that like even someone even tweeted this at him, right? Or tweet this in general. So he has a tweet that he saved, and it's from this guy on YouTube. And he says, I like black hosts for esports because they know how to hype up the, like, just think about it. I like black hosts because they hype up the crowd. And granted, it's kind of like one of those things where it's like, all right, he's not being racist, but it's also just kind of like, wow, really? Like, That's why the only reason you like black hosts is like, it's just certain things that just kind of make me go like, like what? Like the Swaggy P meme where it's like the question marks and he's like, that's
Yeah. Yeah,
that's
because
what I
if
mean
it
when
was
I
if it was
saw
a white
that.
host, it would have been like, wow, this host is just so good at hyping up the crowd. It wouldn't have been attached to the color of him at all. It would have just been, wow, look at how skilled he is at doing this.
Exactly. And so that's why also like it's interesting because it's like people may say, well, if you don't want it to be like that, then why do you focus on the fact that he's black or this person's black? Because it's so important to have different representation and different voices. And that's why I'm always like, you can have someone who's Latin, have someone who's Latin. If you can have someone who's black, have someone who's black, right? And obviously don't just have people just to like fit the quota.
Yeah.
Obviously you want to have people who know what they're talking about and are skillful and everything like that. But I think it's so important to have these different perspectives and different um, um, individuals, right?
Yeah.
And also because inclusion is something that's so important, and an inclusion in esports and in video game industry is super important, and that's the only way that, like I said, it's going to lead to us fixing some of these problems. There's still a toxicity problem. There's still sexism, whether it's the workforce or outside the workforce. There's still, we're not seeing enough women in the pro space. Doesn't mean that, look, I mean, it doesn't mean that they're bad. I mean, look, Tina just won the Twitch Rivals Fortnite and was the MVP. So it has nothing to do with the fact of people being bad or not. It's about opportunities, inclusion, and comfortability, right? If someone has never played, like, let's just granted, like, someone has never played a sport at a high level, and you want them to compete on a high level in esports, and having it, like, even pro soccer players are dealing with racism, right? So it's just like these certain things that I think that have to be implemented in order to fix. So although esports is more diverse, it's still not diverse, and there's still issues that I feel like people are ignoring, especially when it comes to inclusion and diversity, that they need to fix. They'll be like, "Oh, yeah, we're diverse. We have women on our team."
So kind of
like,
going more into that, whose responsibility do you look at first? Who's the first person you're like, you need to fix your shit right now?
Well, it starts with the companies. It starts with the publishers.
So like the game company. So like
Yeah,
we would look at like the Blizzard games, the
Riot
Riot
Games,
games,
Activision Blizzard. Yep.
Yep. Okay, so you start there.
It starts with them. It starts with them. It starts with those who hire for the broadcast team or hire for certain event. It starts with the communities accepting the fact that we do have still an issue in diversity and inclusion.
Yeah.
And it starts with accepting all of that, because like this is the thing, like you can't fix a problem if you're not going to accept the fact that it is a problem.
Yeah.
And you can talk to various people in the community who still think it's a problem, right? And so it starts with honestly, it starts with the community itself. It's not just, we can't just, this is another thing I don't like. I also don't like when the community, and not just esports community, it could be music community, sports community, etc. They expect celebrities or high profile people to fix the problems. No, we can all take the time to fix the problems, right?
Yeah.
We can all take the time in doing stuff ourselves to kind of fix the issue. But also, it's very important for some of these higher companies to help and assist with these problems and accept the fact that there are these problems to begin with, and how do you address it? So that's why, like, yes, Activision Blizzard, all these people definitely should be working on these things. But also, you, me, anyone else who's watching, we also can work on these things as well. That's why for Twitter Esports, I try to highlight different perspectives, different aspects of the industries, different problems, different video games, even indie games. I try to show as much as I can to not only help educate those who are outside and inside, but to provide a spotlight and an opportunity for these people to highlight themselves and to showcase themselves. Because you never know who's watching Cheddar Esports who may be like, oh, let's hire this person or this or that. So I feel like it's my responsibility to highlight and to show a full circle perspective and full circle highlights of people in this industry, and not just have it be one or two or three.
Okay, I really like that. So my last question for you. Okay, having had the experience being on the show, it's hopefully unique and different. That's what I'm going for. If it's not, then oh well, this was just interesting. Having had the experience being on the show, if you could see anyone being on the show, the only qualifications, they have to speak English because it's the only language I speak, and they have to be involved in either the gaming community, entertainment, esports. They can be in front of camera, behind camera, anything like that. They just need to be involved in those industries. Who would you like to see be on the show? And if you want to give me a couple of names, you can. And if you say someone who I've had, I'll also let you know.
Well, you're Amanda Stevens, so
Yep.
yeah. Who else? Uh, I would love to hear the story of translators in different industries within esports. I would love to hear. I would love to hear from um, more Latin women. I feel like Latin women, and even Black women, but also Latin women, I feel like don't get as much
Hmm.
storytelling or opportunity to tell their story. Um, I definitely I want to hear from people within the FGC community because I feel like sometimes FGC does not get as much love and attention as it should.
Hmm.
Um,
Do you have any specific names like people like, wow, this is like the person who I haven't seen much of?
oh my gosh.
This is arguably the
Let's
hardest
do, I
question
mean,
I've asked you.
pe- people like, people like Tasty Steve, um, Malik Forte,
Hmm.
just in general. Um, my gosh, I have so many people. That's the problem. I know, like, I have
That's
so many people
okay.
that I
That's
think would
okay.
be great. Also, I think, oh my gosh, why am I forgetting this person's name?
For
This is
anyone
really
who
bad.
didn't get their name called, I'm sure it's nothing personal. Just this is a very on the spot question,
So
okay?
this is what I would do. This is what I'm gonna do. I wasn't prepared for this question. When this episode comes out, I will tweet my response tied to it, and I will at those people because there's a lot
Okay.
of people that are going through my head right now, and I'm just like, I wish I want to name them, but it's just
That's
like, all right, let me. I feel like I can have a concise list later.
that sounds good. That sounds good to me. So thank you so much, Erin, for being on the show. I really appreciate it. I had fun. Hopefully you had some fun. I'm sorry about that you're going through
Yeah,
stuff.
I
I
had
feel so
fun.
bad. So that being said, if you have any shout outs or anything you want to give, you're more than welcome to. So I will have your Twitter stuff all available and for people to reach out to you if they want to. So
Yeah, no problem. Like, yeah, Twitter, Erin A. Simon. I want to definitely shout out, like, again, Kyle Harvey, who kind of helped push me into this space. Amanda Stevens for helping me. Everyone for Cheddar Esports for giving me the opportunity. The team on Cheddar Esports, Brandon, Colin, Chris, Rick, Jimmy, Zane. I want to also, everyone who's been supporting me, in the communities from different aspects of esports and gaming who really really push me to kind of speak on certain things and to earn love how I'm contributing to the esports industry and communities. I appreciate every single one of you, and I hope that as I continue to get bigger and provide more spotlight and help to provide more opportunity, that you guys will continue to support me throughout the entire time, and also be open to telling me if there's something that I'm not doing correctly or anything like that. Feel free because I want to try and help as much as I can.
okay, thank you so much for Erin. Everyone out there, my name has been Blake Panashevitz. This has been The Minds of Media, and until next time, I hope you all have a wonderful day.